morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We have an exciting topic for you today. I think most of us, when we think about warehousing, we tend to think about the idea of storing parts and basically readiness from that point of view. So how do we take warehousing into something that's more customer-focused, value add, and delivering an actual enablement to the service members that are in this room and also doing the work that we asked them to go do. We have some great panelists today that I'm going to introduce in just a few minutes to talk about this process. We're going to take you from two stages of this process. One area where we actually have created a smart warehouse and we're actually starting to operationalize that task area. And the second part of this process is where another organization that we all work with, DLA, on a regular basis, and where they're at on that journey. But before we get started, let's do some introductions if you don't mind really quick. Mr. Bailey, would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Harry Bailey. I'm currently serve as the production plant manager for Marine Corps Depot Command in Albany, Georgia. That's part of Marine Corps Logistics Command. Before that, I was the sort of the architect, or with a lot of other folks' help for the smart warehouse and the 5G project. So that's probably what brings me up here today, is because I've seen that from the beginning. And I'm just happy to be here. I think this is a great organization, and it helps to spread the news and spreads what's important to all of us, and we'll make the force better.
Thank you. Mr. Casas, please.
Sure. I'm Manny Casas. I'm the R&D Program Manager at DLA headquarters in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. I manage the DLA's 5G Smart Warehouse program with emerging technologies for the adoption of these technologies to improve efficiencies in DLA distribution network warehouses in order to better serve, provide better logistic response to the warehouse, to the warfighter in particular. I've been in the technology sector for quite a while, now trying to really, take DLA to the next step with regards to the transformation, digital transformation, transforming those traditional warehouses that are very labor intensive into smart warehouses in a digital manner in which we can optimize those distribution centers. DLA is composed of 24 distribution centers around the world. It has a big logistics footprint in the Department of Defense and the entire government as a whole, and in the nation as well. Thank you.
Thank you both. Please have a seat. Before we get started into the topic and the details, I'd ask a couple of things if you don't mind. As you think about or hear this topic area, think through what your warehousing, what your supply, and how that works in your operation. Think about the overall mechanics of how that takes place. Is it still heavily manual? Do you take 1348s and somebody is highlighting, recording, calling out the details of the NINs and serial numbers on those documentation? Do you move parts manually through MHE through your warehouse consistently in this process? Do you do wall-to-wall inventories every year? And is that a cost center that consumes a lot of time in this process? Is human error, which is not by fault of the material handlers and supply techs in this process, do you see a lot of human error? Transposition of numbers, call out of wrong numbers, recording. If everything is going through a keyboard and someone is manually putting it in, do you have that as part of your process now? When there's a demand plan requirement within your process, back to Mr. Casas and DLA, how far in the future does he see your demand, or does DLA see your demand? Is it 90 days or is it a couple of years, and how accurate is that demand plan? On the issue side of the equation, how quick can you respond to your customers and their need in this process? Mr. Bailey and Mr. Casas are going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to talk a lot about that today in the next 40 minutes or so, and about how this is transforming in this process of what we call warehousing rewired. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it on a Friday morning, but let's jump right into it. Mr. Bailey, if you don't mind first, as you introduce yourself, you had a vision about 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years ago, how to put this together. Strategically, you developed a roadmap. Can you tell us how you started with the first step of the roadmap and how you got to where now you have a near functional, operational, smart warehouse within your responsibility?
Sure. First, there was a need, and I'll describe that need just a little bit. We had about 25% of the Marine Corps' inventory at the logistics base in Albany. And we didn't know where it was, we didn't know what we had, and we didn't know what condition it was in. And our primary interface to the system of record was a keyboard and a supply tech who sometimes they either didn't know, they didn't care, or it was too hard to do the job. In fact, some of the jobs were so tedious that it probably would make you jump off a building if you had to do it all. If I'd had to do it all today, maybe I would have. But we wanted to at least get as good as the corner grocery store with at least scanning and taking our inventory and knowing what we had. So we didn't have any of that. We were spending millions of dollars on wall-to-wall inventories, and the next audit cycle would be we would lose what we found the first time we did the inventory. So that was the need, and the vision was really gathered from several different places. One, the corner grocery store. They knew what they had, and they knew what it cost, and they knew if it was out of date. And then we were briefing this to one of our generals, and he said one of his aides asked him, "Well, sir, what is the smart warehouse?" And he says, "Well, you just type in, and the robot goes and gets what you need." And my response was, "That's exactly right, except for we don't want to type anything in. We just want to say it, speak it, or point to it." So that's the kind of the out vision that we have. That's where we started. Now, as far as the roadmap goes, that could be a lot further. But some improvements we have made, since we started this crayons and clipboard kind of thing. We have RFID tags that we are able to mark all of our military equipment over $100,000. So we keep up with that way. And we segment our inventory into our weapons. We have the largest weapons warehouse in the Marine Corps. And we use a warehouse management system that was developed on site, and we adapted it, and we implemented optical character recognition, which incorporates machine learning and AI. So we actually just show the camera on the phone, and we've taught that optical character reading to understand what those serial numbers are on that weapon. So we get to read that, and it's probably 5 times faster than, and only takes one person to do that, rather than have 2 people read off serial numbers, write stuff down, and lose it, and then forget to record it into the system of record. So that's kind of where we are now. The future is the operational piece of the 5G smart warehouse, where we know what we have when we get it, and even we know with our partners in DLA where it is up the supply chain. And of course, we have to be good customers in that. We have to say, what do we need, and give the DLA a chance to write those contracts and make sure that supply chain doesn't dry up for us. But we can get it into the warehouse, store it properly, store it automatically, and have our supply techs, instead of not knowing what they're doing, they can actually start analyzing the data and seeing where we're short, what we're missing. So that's sort of the goal of the future, and we can talk more about the devices and more about the interoperability. But in a nutshell, I think that's where we're headed.
Thank you, sir. And if I can add just a little bit to that vision 4 or 5 years ago was probably one of the harder parts to execute, my opinion. Getting the vision, getting everyone turned and going in that direction, and thinking about warehousing differently from that aspect. As Mr. Bailey said, to create that digital warehouse in the largest armory in the Marine Corps, where no one has to touch a keyboard, no one has to do a manual entry through the keyboard, was his goal. And that was a goal he set forth for this team. I supported with him to go through this process. So that vision, is now being executed. Mr. Casas, if you don't mind, you're maybe a little bit more on the front end of this process. You're architecting this now. You have some starts within DLA, if I may characterize it that way, and you're now starting down this with 24 different warehouses across DLA with a vision over the next several fiscal years. Would you mind explaining to the group here how you're seeing this and what your strategy to execution is for this process?
Sure, Chad. So DLA is going through a major digital modernization in over 25 years. The last modernization was like in the early 1980s. And the technology that we used back then is not really meeting our emerging requirements. So, new threats with Russia, China, technology is advancing so fast, regulations catching up to technology, and human capacity as well as learning about these new emerging technologies such as 5G, AI, blockchain, etc. So back 5 years ago, the DLA CIO recognized the need for science and technology in logistics. and DLA in particular, the need for infusing innovation and new digital tools into DLA distribution network. With that said, we have established this 5G Smart Warehouse program to do that. But the matter of the fact is that we face an environment that we dealing with, new threats, funding constraints, timeline limitations, resource constraints. With that said, there's so much we can do, to advance. And back in the days, the government back in the 1980s was leading with regards to innovation technology. Now it's private industry dealing. So there is an opportunity out there to bring commercial off-the-shelf, what industry is doing, and bring those technologies for a DoD application. And that's what we're trying to do with a 5G Smart Warehouse. Therefore, considering all the resource constraints, we strategically partnering with Marine Corps Logistics Command to be able to build on what they're doing rather than creating the wheel all over again. We want to get into this digital transformation together, as we are on this together for national security, and be able to leverage what they're doing and bring to DLA in order to continue building into that, continue to from the experimentation, research, development, test, and evaluation, all the way into we transition into production. For DLA, when we're talking in the context of transition and production, we're talking about moving from RDT&E, research, development, test, and evaluation, and a transition plan will be, and the vision, of having this 5G Smart Warehouse is to start fielding this our critical distribution network. DLA distribution centers are a strategic asset for DLA in order to accomplish its mission, either to support military operations or to support a military or a humanitarian disaster. We have two major distribution centers, one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast in New Cumberland and San Joaquin, California, that manage most of the volume of the items that go into the warehouse. With that said, we have another 5 distribution centers that are critical to us for the network. And once we complete, we continue learning from these new technologies, 5G, AI, how we can apply to logistics, blockchain, and leveraging from what the Marine Corps is doing, continue building to go through the research, experimentation phase, research, test, and evaluation. Then we can move into a production environment in which we can say, okay, it's time to start fielding this across the DLA distribution network and start seeing those return on investments that we put early on, through the research, development, test, and evaluation, and be able to optimize those DLA distribution business process, in particular with inventory management. I tell you, one is every day is a Christmas day for DLA because they don't know what's coming into the warehouse. So, they have to guess what's coming into the warehouse. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of accounting material because the resources are not prepared to anticipate what's coming into the warehouse. So that's a major problem. The other one is we have to do inventory reconciliation on yearly basis, and we need to account for 100% inventory. As you can imagine, we don't have the digital tools to do that, and current processes really human labor intensive, sending people to the shelves to count every single item. So we want to automate those business processes. And the other one, second priority will be material distribution. How material moves from point A to point B inside the warehouse and outside the warehouse, and as well the asset visibility with regards, the matter of the fact is in the Department of Defense, every DoD component operates with their own system. We have fragmented supply chain that not necessarily transmit the data. So that makes it very challenging into having asset visibility and anticipate what the customer is requesting, where is the item real time when we send it, let's say, to a aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, or the tracking of any item, across the supply chain from the OEM all the way to the program office, to DLA, NAPSO, et cetera, you name it. So that's a major challenge for us that we want to solve as well with this digital transformation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both. There's a lot of elements to unpack in both of Mr. Bailey and Mr. Casas' comments, but I think as I led off, you heard a lot about the amount of labor involved, the amount of cycle time just to do an inventory, the manual labor associated with that process. But I think a key that both Mr. Bailey and Mr. Casas talked about was the integration from upstream, Marine Corps, MORCOM, LOCOM, back to DLA, then also to their customers. With that in mind, Mr. Bailey, you've had a vision for several years now that I've heard you talk about, especially the last year and a half as plant manager for the depot in Albany. Is how do you get your demand plan? How do you get your vision back upstream to DLA? They know what you need when you need it, but also to create enough of a vision of demand planning to where they can get, economies of scale and ordering. Then also 1MEF, 2MEF, and so forth, and being able to react to the needs there. That reverse logistics of weapon systems coming back to your depot for you to perform your MRO functions to get it back. Can you tell how you're trying to spread that and move into both directions from not only upstream in DLA, but downstream into your clients and your customers?
Yes. Of course, that's our biggest problem is being able to get in the depot, because we remanufacture, but we use a lot of new parts that come from DLA. And it's a mystery sometimes, and we say, if ever the parts get, we call it dumpster diving right now, because we just have a bunch of parts in a big watermelon box, and people go in there and just say, oh, I need this, I need this. That's kind of the situation we have now. But again, the same principles in warehousing, work, almost anywhere in supply chain. Is knowing what you have and knowing where it is, so you can get it where you need it at the right time, so you can add value. And that value piece of it really is driving back up, all the way up to the supply chain, through DLA, through the demand, to say, I need to write a contract because I've only got, supply for 20 more days of this one particular critical piece of part that we need for a weapon system. So that's, the need is there for sure. Yeah. But, the devil's in the details. When we look at a weapon system, we may have 2,000 parts that need to be ordered in one day, and how to separate those and how to put them in the right order and the sequence in the manufacturing or the remanufacturing processes. That's in our bill of material, our BOMs, yeah, and our work sequences. So we really had to start with that very basic. What am I doing now? And what happens if I don't get this wheel? What can I do? And I think I don't know how many people went to the theory of constraints training here. Did anybody go this week? Okay, so that's the theory of constraints and lean are really what we're trying to practice, and that drives the need and the supply chain all the way back up to the beginning. Where DLA is writing contracts and getting that stuff to us. So that's kind of a general overview. I don't know specifically if you're
perfect.
Okay.
No, yes, sir. So, Mr. Casas, if we take that from the receiving side of that, the demand plan that looks out 90 days, 180 days to maybe even 3 years out, we talk about the interoperability of systems where Mr. Bailey's operating with Navy ERP or localized MRO system, putting in a warehouse management system that is kitting parts for him in, how did you say it? A watermelon box? So getting away from that process and a little bit more into the kitted type of part. Can you tell how that informs your process and creates a better mission focus, or being able to satisfy your customer, in this case, Mr. Bailey, or others from your 24 warehouses across the country?
Sure. So I'm going to answer this question from the technology perspective.
Yes, sir.
Chad. That's a major challenge for DLA. As asset visibility, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the it's a big problem in the entire Department of Defense. How assets move, the data from point all the way from the OEM, all the way to DLA, all the way to the warfighter, and the way we're doing it right now is very labor intensive. It requires a lot of research, human labor, in order to provide. DLA is responsible for providing asset visibility to the customer, to the Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, and to support FEMA. With that said, it takes a lot of resources, a lot of time, and a lot of effort in order just to track any type of supply chain data. From either a customer, the Marine Corps that comes into DLA. With that said, we trying to mitigate this challenge. We have developed a prototype with regards to the application of blockchain to better be able to have that asset visibility all the way from there. But it's still challenges that the technology is very mature, is out there. But one of the big problems is the quality of data, or where the data resides, and is the department ready to leverage on the data? And that's something we're trying to solve with our counterparts, with the Navy as well, to make sure that we actually cleaning up our data in order to be able to utilize better and then plug in and feed this data into these new digital technologies that's basically the blood of these technologies. Without quality of data, they say, garbage in, garbage out. That's basically what happens. If we don't have a good quality data, then we're not going to get positive outcomes. So right now, having this prototype, it will enable DLA, in an ecosystem, collaborating with industry, academia, the scientists, or customers, such as the U.S. Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, in order to better have the data available to be plugged into the system and provide in real-time asset visibility across the entities and components. So the Marine Corps will know, okay, my item is on this stage in the supply chain, it will get to DLA, or the warfighter will be able to know, okay, I have this part, it's already a DLA and is ready to be shipped out. Or DLA will have an awareness if the item is arriving in the Persian Gulf or any other war theater. So it is a very complex problem. It requires a collaboration, I would say collaboration, and I encourage leaders at all levels to break those silos that we, in this digital transformation era, where technology is moving so fast, we can no longer afford to work in silos rather than collaborate, in particular with this problem that we have the asset visibility across the DoD supply chain.
Thank you. Perfect. So if you don't mind, we're going to switch gears a little bit and get back into the four walls of the warehouse for a minute, because we don't want to leave behind the material handlers and supply techs in this process. As we facilitate the movement of like 5G smart warehouses across the government, across the warehousing space, facilitize all this equipment in here. For example, the smart warehouse Mr. Bailey has 11 robots in it. It has 10 autonomous robots moving around by themselves, and it has one stationary robot in this process. But it still requires material handlers to and supply techs, for us to think differently about their operations. Less on the manual movement of gear, more on the accessing of data, being able to take more of a control tower point of view and see what's taking place for that day, for that week. Mr. Bailey, if you don't mind, maybe talk a little bit about what the future of position descriptions look like. And instead of hiring a traditional material handler and supply tech, what do you think the kind of rewired supply tech and material handler need? What capabilities skill set do they need to have?
Well, it's, we call it upskilling, and I think there's been a lot of emphasis in the whole DoD in trying to look at that. But the critical thinking is number one. But some formal training, and I don't mean necessarily a BS degree in computer science or AI or anything like that. But those skills are more native, now, than they were maybe when I was growing up. But we have those sort of formal, how do I connect to and what does my data integrity look like? What is it? You have to understand the data, where it comes from. So you need some data analytical skill. You need some discipline in the system. You need, we need to repair these robots. Those are what we used to call PLCs or programmable logic. Now we're doing this through software. Yeah. So we need, software engineers or gamers, people that write games. Yeah. Those type of things are. We participate with the First Robotics Clubs, and we sponsor some of those guys. And some of those high schoolers are out there, developing robots, and we can. In fact, we give them a challenge as part of their graduation. Project, so that they can build one of our inventory robots, not to compete with the ones that we bought, but to develop that skill. So, absolutely. So we're rewriting PDs to take care of the robotic stuff. We have robotic arms in the plant now where we're using to paint. Well, we have to know those digits. We got to be able to reverse engineer. We have to be able to scan things, and you got to be able to manipulate all that data through systems and be able to click a lot of different tabs. And that's where hopefully we can streamline things where it makes it easier. We can just kind of point and click. But until we get to that point, we have to have people that can think, and they think in a data-centric way, and that has some computer and software type skills that really, they've been missing. They might be a little bit different in the Air Force, but the Marine Corps, we struggle with that. We struggle with developing that, especially at the production plant level. A lot of the folks that we have that are performing now are, I think our average age is 49 years old, and we've got some great folks that know what they're doing, but they might not be prepared for the future. So we put a lot of emphasis on getting those folks ready for the future.
Yep. To add to what Mr. Bailey is saying, before I go over to Mr. Casas, one of the things that he stipulated, one of the requirements for the organization was that each material handling supply tech needed to have a scanner, a tablet, a headset to do voice pick, those type of parameters that took them away from the clipboard, pen and paper, or I think he said colors and crayons a few minutes ago as a symbolism, but to take that to interface into the systems, to go that route. So we're asking these gamers or that type of capability to be transitioned into these material handlers and supply technicians. And I think they're responding extremely well. But Mr.
Yeah, it makes warehousing, it wasn't very exciting before.
Exactly.
Like I say, it was very tedious. Now I think we can be excited about people being more fulfilled rather than just going and counting something on the shelf. They can develop a method, a system, and find shortcuts.
Well put.
Yeah,
absolutely. Mr. Casas, as you're thinking through your strategy and starting to execute this now, as you mentioned, San Joaquin and also in Pennsylvania, are you thinking differently about, or is your team thinking differently about the skill set, the upskilling of the resources needed to operate these more high-end, high-tech type systems you're envisioning?
We're actually considering that that's a major critical aspect of the digital transformation, talent of the end user, right? And there has to be a value proposition for the end user. There has to be a value proposition for the warfighter. When you're talking between the DLA context, you have to keep in mind that DLA is a very unionized organization. We have unions there that are looking for the warehouse worker, for the well-being of the warehouse, as it's supposed to be. So from the technology perspective, from operation, from the management perspective, we want to make sure that we communicate that value proposition to those unions to be able to transform the mindset, from doing those very labor-intensive business process in the warehouse to be able to facilitate, create an environment that's more, how can I say, sophisticated. We new digital tools in which actually facilitates, it creates a quality of work in the warehouse. Yeah, because we don't want our workers in the warehouse to be there and get bored and then they move into Amazon and we're losing talent. But actually we want to retrain these warehouse workers to be able to and create new career paths in robotics. For instance, instead of driving a forklift from point A to point B so many times during the day, actually be able to monitor a robot and actually provide maintenance into that robot, some more of the critical thinking. And we can actually allocate the workforce to do some of the critical tasks that requires that we're leveraging data analytics in order to be able to provide some insight and empower the workforce to make sure that they're making decisions in the warehouse rather than taking repetitive tasks from point of B. Back to what Mr. Bailey said, it's a totally different environment we envision in the warehouse. It's not just going to be four walls. It's going to be a sophisticated environment that's going to create a good relationship, not only with the unions, but also with the management in the unions, and also a value proposition to our customers, to the warfighter, and really provide that logistic response in a timely manner anywhere in the world.
Well put, yes. Let's take that piece of it. I would imagine now that in the audience, there's a lot of customers for Mr. Bailey's operating specialist at Depot. He's taking in weapon systems and returning them back out. You obviously have, everyone out here is your customer in this process. So when you're thinking about, as Mr. Bailey said, or I think you said it, around Christmas morning and parts and so forth, when you think about the KPIs that matter to designing a smart warehouse, and if we list some of those out, readiness, reduction in cost, is speed of dock to stock, stock to issue, inventory accuracy, maybe reducing complexity, taking risk out of the equation. Mr. Casas, can maybe you pick a couple of those, or either the other KPIs What's in your mind as you're thinking through this concept and how you're going to transform the way DLA manages parts? What are those critical KPIs that matter to your business?
Sure. One of them I can talk about is just because of the current nature of how we do business in present, very labor intensive, as I mentioned, there is a lot of risk for human error in the data that we are putting into the warehouse management system. And with that said, we want to make sure that when we leverage these digital technologies, we can actually reduce the error rate in data. For instance, something that we're looking in DLA is to have a error rate of only 5% by automating the business processes, how we input data into the warehouse management system with digital tools. The other one is when we're talking about moving the material from point A to point B, we want to reduce the lead time between traveling time from point A to point B by probably for 4 hours or 3 hours, moving from warehouses to warehouses in a DLA distribution center, probably to 1 hour, okay? The other one is the abundant cost that goes in human labor costs with regards when we have to do our inventory reconciliation every year. We have to send, we have 24 distribution centers. You can imagine how many people we have to send to the shelves to count this and then verify what we have on the shelves. So having the ability to do this automatically, for instance, leveraging sensor IoT to be able to collect that data automatically from the shelves and then put the data into the cloud and feed the data into the warehouse management system. And really, the end user will, in a matter of seconds, have real-time inventory. You can imagine how much cost we can save there and allocate the cost in other areas that are more critical to continue supporting the mission of DLA. So labor cost is another KPI that we're looking into as well.
Well put. Mr. Bailey, if you don't mind me saying, I think you probably started off with audit readiness. Hey, you started off at the top of the hour, top of the session around, I need to know where all my parts are at, where's all the gear at. How did you take that concept or metric, and what other KPIs or what matters to you now?
Well, of course, we have to be accountable to our taxpayers with everything we do, but we won't, and nobody wants to pay for inefficiencies, and nobody wants to pay to wait, and that's really what we look at ourselves as internal customers. So that's kind of a driving factor. So that accountability, floor to book to floor, existence, completeness, those are important. I mean, that's the results. But when we look at our systems and developing when we use theory constraints and lean and our process, we don't want to automate a bad process. But the internal controls are important to us. Where the transaction takes place, where the money is gathered, where it's spent, where it's used, and that's really, I think, what you focus on when you try to solve these problems. You'll really say, where's it costing me? How can I prove it? How can I justify it? How does other people come in and look at what I'm doing and it matches to audit principles and general accounting principles back up to our financial sheets, our balance sheets, and even funds balance to treasury. So it all feeds back up to the end product, which is accountability.
Yeah, perfect. If I don't mind adding, if you don't mind me adding a bit to this, it's if you think about both gentlemen have talked about wall-to-wall inventories, and you start thinking about 9 months, 10, 12, 15 different people manually touching every NIN and serial number in the warehouse to count, record, and enter. Mr. Casas just talked about human error, so you can imagine the kind of transposition of characters in this process. What Mr. Bailey's doing in a smart warehouse, if he doesn't mind me saying it this way, is that there's a point in time where, and it's not very far away, 18 months, 24 months away, where that whole inventory process can almost be autonomous. Everything is tagged with an RFID tag. You have autonomous robots going in and scanning, which he's doing right now as part of the smart warehouse testing. So going and scanning every RFID tag, returning that to the inventory control desk. Then what you get into is random sampling. Let me go verify with the robot sample to make sure it's accurate. As the confidence intervals grows in this process, instead of doing that random sampling monthly, quarterly, I start to do it annually then to make sure that what's being read, RFID return, and validated through this system, that 9 months, that 12 to 15 people times that labor rate starts to go down really quickly in that process. So I think, if y'all don't mind me saying, that those are critical KPIs I can see when you say reducing costs, Mr. Casas. Also, the accountability in the process really becomes something that resonates well. When Lieutenant General Banta walked through Mr. Bailey's warehouse a couple of weeks ago, that was one of the first things he noticed as we were going through the tour was just that process is, wait a minute, how are you going to do this? And it really just started clicking from that standpoint forward. If you don't mind, both of you have brought up lean processes, how these processes you don't want to speed up bad processes and just make your defects show up quicker within this overall effort. There's also the second, Mr. Casas, you've talked a lot about data in this process and being able to use data to maybe more predictively decide or make decisions about what's going to take place and how does this take place. There's been probably the last 9 to 18 months in this process also this concept of, okay, we're getting to this point where now we're starting to mature the warehousing process over the next couple of years. Okay, how do we take this and forward deploy it? How do we get it out into more of the point of conflict, the point of where the operations are taking place? How do you use data? How do you use lean process? How do you start thinking about these 24 warehouses or the warehouses in your inventory, sir, Mr. Bailey, and start thinking about how do I take this and forward deploy this? How do I use data to help make those decisions? Maybe Mr. Bailey, if you can go first, please.
So we're evangelizing in a way. We're saying this is what works, and I guess maybe a better word might be we're trying to franchise this method, especially with our Marine Corps. Our units, our war fighters, out in the front lines as we go to the Pacific. We have islands, and our vision is to just take that stack, that local Azure stack that we have. I don't know. I probably should. Maybe we should explain that a little bit more.
Yeah.
But cloud computing is important to us. We know that, but that might not be possible in remote forward areas. So we need to be able to gather that data quickly and do the same thing we do in the rear, forward. And that Azure 5G network is a way for us to keep the data, flowing, and that comes down to maintenance because we might have, junior and folks out there, fixing something, and they might need, some advice from somebody a little bit senior, and we'd use the AR, VR, show me what I see, and those sort of things in that deployable Azure stack. Now, that's just part of what you were talking
Absolutely.
about. But
Yep.
I think that basically we're going to franchise this, or maybe even make it menu driven, where we have the automated devices ready to be ATO'd. We have a system that's ready to be ATO'd, and we have licenses. We have a package, and when you take the elements of that package and you can design your own solution at your own site. So that's really kind of the goal in what we're doing.
Perfect. Mr. Casas, you've talked a lot about the 24 warehouses and your vision, your strategy. As you start thinking about working through them over the next several years or decade or so through that process and getting those all in, times will change, conflicts will change, and so on. Are part of your vision, how do I take the DLA mission and start to embed it closer to or with Marine Corps, Air Force, some of the customers you mentioned a few minutes ago? How are you thinking through that, sir, especially around the concept of data and forward deployment?
Yes, so part of the transition plan or production plan is that we have identified 7 DLA distribution centers that need to be modernized. That's to include the one in Pennsylvania, Susquehanna, San Joaquin, Norfolk, Oklahoma City, just to name a few off the top of my head, okay? And there are others out there too, part of the 7 that need to be as highest priority, and they will be part of the low rate initial production, and then move from there into the rest of the distribution centers. With that said, we wanna, what we're doing right now with the Marine Corps is, leveraging, pulling an extension. We're developing our 5G test bed right next to the smart warehouse where the Marine Corps have, in order to continue learning about that 5G technology. And this is a capability that's very impressive. And we wanna make sure that we strategically getting into the transition phase and production phase when we deploy this 5G capability. For instance, the capability has the ability to just have the hardware in one location and provide connectivity of 5G into in the middle of the country. So we can have our 5G testbed and the DLA distribution Albany provide connectivity, for instance, in Oklahoma City all the way to Susquehanna. and at the same time, we can have another 5G hardware in the West Coast to provide connectivity to San Joaquin on the distribution centers that are around the area. With that said, at the same time, be able to better serve our customers that we support on those specific distribution centers. With that said, there is a need in DLA to develop the roadmap that we have created. The roadmap will intend to focus first on 5G, material distribution activities, technologies, inventory management technologies, and asset visibility. At a point in time, we can achieve the cybersecurity approval to be able to deploy this and eventually create those return on investment, monetary and non-monetary as well.
Thank you. We're about at the end of our session here. We're down to just a couple of seconds left. As you can see, we have two senior leaders in government, Marine Corps DLA doing some amazing work around reimagining warehousing. I guess a couple things I would ask if you have questions, Mr. Bailey, Mr. Casas afterward can talk you through what they're doing, the vision and so forth through this process. But I think also think through it through the lens of how your operations are taking place and what do you see from what you heard in the last 40 minutes from these two gentlemen. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate your attention. Again, if you have any questions, not to volunteer Mr. Bailey or Mr. Casas, but afterwards, please, please ask them questions.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.